Good afternoon, good morning, welcome, and I hope that you're all safe and well wherever it is that you're dialing in from, joining us from today. My name is Gemma Soul. I'm a director at the School for CEOs, and today I have the privilege of hosting this webinar. We've offered free thought leadership webinars to the executive community now for around 3 years. And today, with around 450 people registered, this is the highest demand we've ever had for a webinar. And we feel that it's particularly important in times like these that we do come together to share our experiences, because leadership is lonely at the best of times. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope that you take lots away from this webinar. This is the first of a two-part series designed to help business leaders deal with the impact of the coronavirus. Today, we're focusing on the people leadership challenges, and the main presentation will be led by School for CEOs co-founder and managing partner, David Soul.
Time that our generation has never experienced. It's nothing like the financial crisis of 2008, or indeed the dot-com bubble bursting in 2001, nor even the Great Depression of the late 1920s. This is a time of global crisis, where the world is fighting a new and invisible enemy. These are uncertain and highly unpredictable times. Over the next couple of webinars, we would like to share with you some thoughts and ideas about how you can cope, how you can prepare your teams and businesses to work through this emergency, and how you can emerge stronger and more resilient when things return to some degree of normality. Now, we don't claim to have all the answers, but in pulling together the content for this session, and the one that Patrick will lead this time next week, we have asked for contributions from our faculty. Some of the UK's best known CEOs, non-exec directors, and business leaders from a wide range of public, private, and family-owned organisations. And these will help provide some further colour to our own thoughts. So what we'd like to do is share some of these insights along with our own views for 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments. But before we get going, we thought it'd be interesting to get your views on how long this crisis will last. So Gemma, if I can ask you to bring up the first poll, how long do you think that the COVID-19 crisis will last? Things will be back to normal by summer, it's going to last up until the autumn, or things might get better by Christmas. Okay, so that is just under 50% think it's going to last until the autumn, September. Some optimists thinking we'll be back to normal by May. And then the rest, probably Christmas time, and then some even thinking a little bit longer. Patrick, you're involved with a number of different businesses. Are there any consistent themes around timescales with them?
So, David, over time, I've seen the optimists become less optimistic and the pessimists become maybe more pessimistic. I think most people now are looking at 3 months of great difficulty, hell, some people are describing it as, 3 months of something that's not quite as bad, and then 3 months of climbing out of that. So maybe by this time next year, things might be back to something like what we used to think of as normal just a month ago.
Well, I think one of the things is, as I was drawing up these questions, I was reminded of the Persian king who asked his wise men to come up with a phrase that would make him feel happy when he was sad. The phrase, which has been attributed to the Sufi poets, but which has subsequently been used by such luminaries as Abraham Lincoln, is "This too shall pass." Now, the king was absolutely delighted with this and had it inscribed on the inside of his gold ring. But what he forgot was that it is actually a double-edged sword, as the same applies when he's happy. This too shall pass. Now, the crisis will come to an end. What we need to do is ensure that our people and our businesses emerge from it in as good a state as possible, and that we all learn from it so that we are better prepared to deal with such issues in future. Because, as we know, even when things are benign, this too shall pass. Let's see if we can get the technology working and see if we can have another poll. So this is as a leader, how well prepared do you feel? So if you feel on top of it, vote yes. If you feel it's all a bit harem-scarum and you're running around like a headless chicken, vote no. And if some days okay, some days not so good, put kind of. Get some votes in. Okay, so some days you feel on top of it, other days less so. That's not surprising. I think I would share that sentiment. Well, we're well into the crisis, and quite a lot of actions have been taken already. The government has been quite decisive in regard to its support for businesses, although you could argue that it was slower to mandate social distancing. We know of many businesses who have already taken some drastic actions and are well down their crisis management contingency plans. So what we would like you to do is to invite you to consider your own crisis management leadership through the lens of our dimensions model. This looks at how you'll operate managing up, down, out, in, and across. And I'd like to take each of these dimensions in turn. But before we begin, I can't emphasize enough the importance of communication and leadership. It really is the golden thread. We would encourage you to be thoughtful about your communication. Take time over it. Be clear about your messaging and recognize that communication is a two-way process. And given that we're being forced to work in a different way at the moment, give some consideration to the media through which you communicate with your colleagues, clients, and other key stakeholders. When we asked our faculty for one piece of advice on people leadership, it was no surprise that communication was their overarching priority. This is what they said. There's something about repeating your key messages. They won't always land first time around. And we're going to talk about going on a news diet later on. So the point about taking control of your message is key. Practice makes perfect. Winging it simply won't work for you if you want to ensure you communicate authentically. And to be authentic, you have to be honest. People want to trust you and believe in you. If you aren't honest, then you're scuppered. And we'll cover this final point as we work through the dimensions, but you need to communicate in all directions. Some of you will have bosses who you will need to manage and keep informed. Some of you will have a board and a chairman, and others will have other important stakeholders, such as owners who need to be kept updated. But remember, this is a two-way street. In times of crisis, your board and chair should be useful resources to you. While no one has seen a crisis of this magnitude and scale before, they should be able to provide you with balanced, unconditional support, while at the same time offering good, objective challenge. You may need to schedule exceptional board meetings as the situation evolves, and if you do, don't forget the importance of the pre-syndication and socialization of issues with some of your key protagonists. If you can get them on side informally, then there'll be strong supporters in the more formal settings. But as our faculty said, you can't communicate enough. Even the non-executives and other peripheral stakeholders will be interested in how you're managing the business and your people, and they will be absolutely aligned with you as you put in place your plans. So don't forget to keep them informed. Patrick, have you got anything to add?
David, really just to reinforce what you and our
chairman, given your roles with
yeah, sorry. Just to reinforce what you and our faculty said, which is that as a leader, everyone's looking to you. You are the person in charge. This is your moment. You cannot communicate enough. You think you've communicated, you've thought it all through in your head, you've said it once or twice, and you feel that you've got your point across. There is an enormous thirst for information, knowledge, opinion out there, and it's up to you to make sure that you provide that. So double, treble, quadruple your communication efforts in a time of crisis.
Thank you. If we look at managing down, as leaders, this is where we will tend to focus our attention, as we all believe, and quite rightly so, that inspiring, engaging, and motivating our people is our #1 priority, particularly when things aren't going so well. As one of our faculty members said on a recent program, when things are going well, you lead from the back. When things are going badly, you lead from the front. But I want to touch on communication again, given its importance, as well as how you show up as a leader day to day, albeit in the current environment, that's more likely to be on a screen than in person. There is a real need to be clear about the direction of travel. In a crisis like this, we've lost control, and fundamentally, we want to regain it, or at least some semblance of control. Being clear about what the plan is and how it's going to be executed is key. A simple articulation of what you're going to do in the short, medium, and long term is critical, but keep that simple. There's enough going on in people's heads without having to worry about a multi-layered crisis management contingency plan with a phased implementation triggered by optional criteria which are dependent on the emergent government policy. That is just too much for people to take in. Simplicity and clarity are your greatest allies. And don't worry if it isn't exactly right. Perfection is an unaffordable luxury in this environment. And remember, the way in which you articulate the plan is every bit as important as the content. No one needs the Dad's Army Corporal Jones moment where he runs around shouting, "Don't panic, don't panic." As a leader, you could do worse than take the advice that Clementine Churchill offered Winston in August of 1940 at the height of the Battle of Britain. She sent him a letter, and talking about his leadership, she said, "With this terrific power, you must combine urbanity, kindness, and if possible, Olympic calm. Besides, you won't get the best results by irascibility and rudeness." It is time to show humanity, empathy, and even vulnerability as a leader. You really need to connect with your people and, despite the social distancing, remain accessible. You can't become remote from your teams and colleagues, even in the largest of organizations. Let's have another look at what some of our faculty said. Let you read through some of these. So don't worry about getting everything right, but instill confidence, communicate, and be clear. There are also a couple of other points in these comments about recognizing that we will emerge from this crisis and to remain calm. So at the risk of sounding like a broken record, communication remains a key theme. But God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that's perhaps a good indicator of the ratios that we might think about in terms of projecting and receiving. Our colleagues in our businesses may have some great ideas and thoughts about how to stay connected, how to maintain morale, or how the business might take advantage of this crisis. So make sure you take time to listen to them. Of course, you have to spend time sharing your plan, but don't be closed to advice or insights wherever they might come from. You could be surprised. We're all having to enforce or adapt to enforced agile working. So ensuring that you have the right, robust infrastructures to stay in touch is vital. There's an abundance of advice on how to work remotely effectively and how to keep teams operating well together, so I'm not going to dwell on this subject, other than to challenge you to consider how this might change your operating model and ways of working when things do return to normal. And finally, flex your EQ muscle. Emotional intelligence is key. Take time to find out how people are feeling, what their personal situations are, if they're worried about childcare, homeschooling, or elderly dependents. This is a human crisis first and foremost, and it just happens to be impacting on our everyday lives. It just so happens that most of us spend much of our lives working, but we live beyond work. So as leaders, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of our colleagues to try and understand how they are feeling. And people will be reacting differently. But fundamentally, as humans, we have 4 basic emotional needs: to be in control, the need to be safe, the need to belong, and the need to be valued. In this crisis, each of the first 3 of those basic emotional needs are being threatened, and you could probably argue that the 4th is as well. We have lost all control of the situation and are being forced into lockdown. Our safety and health is being threatened by a virulent virus, which seems to have a different impact and effect on different individuals. And our tribes, which are so important to us as humans, have been forcibly dismantled by mandating social distancing. The consequence of this is visceral. Our reptilian brain, which has evolved over 400 million years to keep us alive, kicks in and hijacks our prefrontal cortex. Our brain chemistry changes. The hormones that are secreted then determine our physiological responses. So we're subject to cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, which increases our heart rate, causes our blood pressure to rise, and sets in motion our sympathetic nervous system, readying us for the classic fight, freeze, or flight response. Now, we'll look at how to control this when we talk about the managing in dimension, but this is very primeval reaction is triggered as any of those basic emotional needs are impacted. So expect your people to act and behave differently as time goes on. With that in mind, you need to recognize that you aren't immune to this either as a leader. Your own basic emotional needs are under attack too, so it is perfectly natural not to feel okay. You are being subjected to a set of neurochemical reactions which are really hard to control. But having that awareness is the first step to being able to manage it effectively. So be conscious of how you are showing up as a leader. How are your own energy levels? How are you coping? How does the way that you're feeling translate into your language, your communication style, and your presence with colleagues? How you are and how you present yourself will be reflected throughout the organization. You cast a very long shadow, so think carefully and deliberately about the how as well as the what when you're on show to your colleagues, teams, and organization. And make every effort to try and bring your best self to the situation in spite of the circumstances. This is a great opportunity to create a real community with your suppliers, customers, and other external stakeholders. We saw from the initiative last week how applauding the NHS created a community that people felt emotionally connected to. It created a strong sense of unity and purpose, which gave people hope and energy in the darkest of times. So make sure you connect with your external stakeholders, because it is a great opportunity to build stronger, more trustworthy relationships. As when you come through a difficult period together, having helped one another, the bonds between you and your organizations become stronger and more permanent. As we said at the beginning, this too shall pass. So it is a great opportunity to ensure that you build for the future rather than maintaining a short-term view. Suppliers, customers, and clients are key. And in the same way that you can build a community externally, often the community that you neglect is the one sitting in front of you, on a screen of course, your peer group. It's very easy for your focus to be on supporting your team and managing your boss, to the extent that you forget your peer group, who are every bit as important as everyone else. No one is excluded, So make sure you don't forget them in this maelstrom of chaos. Patrick, before I move on to the managing end, is there anything you'd like to add here?
David, I think you've covered 4 dimensions: managing up, down, managing out, and managing across. To me, it all comes back to the one that I know you're going to do next, managing in. It's all about how you handle yourself and how that then reflects outside.
Okay, great, thank you. So managing in. I'm going to come back to resilience, and in particular, your own personal resilience, the managing in dimension. Now, as we touched on earlier, we know that these different neural networks and associated changes in brain chemistry can radically alter how we think, feel, and behave. And a small walnut-sized part of the brain, which sits just behind your ear, the amygdala, controls all that. And the trick in managing how we feel and behave is to take control of how we think. Because if we can control the scripts that we run in our brain, we control the neurochemistry in our amygdala. Now, at any point in the day, we could plot ourselves on this matrix if we consider our attitude, whether that's positive or negative, alongside our levels of energy, whether we're feeling energized or tired. We'll move around all 4 quadrants over the course of a 24-hour period. When we do this consciously, we can make changes. We can choose to have a more positive attitude, and that will impact the neurochemistry that takes place. The problem is, things tend to happen so quickly in your brain, it's really hard to notice it. But we can all recognize how we are in each of these quadrants. The challenge for us as individuals, and particularly as leaders of teams and organizations, is to have that awareness in the first place. And once we do, to choose to think differently about the situations that present themselves to us. How we think impacts how we feel, and how we feel impacts how we behave. We have a choice about how we think, and that we can therefore choose to become more resilient. It was the Roman poet Juvenal who coined the phrase mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind and a sound body. Now, for those of you without children and who haven't discovered Joe Wicks, trying to maintain some sort of physical activity is important. This is something that isn't exclusive to lockdown, but something we'd encourage as a matter of course. Lockdown simply adds some challenges, but there are a plethora of different options and alternatives, ranging from mindfulness and yoga to high-intensity workouts. Paying attention to what your body is telling you is important. You need to listen to your body and notice what you are feeling. Know what the physiological signs of stress are, such as sleepless nights, grinding your teeth, headaches, general lethargy. And if you do notice yourself experiencing these, then reach out for help. It's important to eat well and to maintain a healthy diet, but you might also want to consider instigating a media or news diet as well. I know I found myself feeling almost overwhelmed by information on COVID-19, pandemics, statistics from all parts of the globe, given its availability on mainstream news channels as well as social media. Rationing your consumption of news and considering a media diet isn't necessarily a bad thing. And finally, as leaders, we need to remain optimistic. A piece of research discovered that of the most successful leaders, around 90% of them scored highly on optimism. Having a can-do attitude in a crisis is really important. Looking for opportunities, both now and in the future, will help ensure your teams and colleagues remain enthused and energized. As leaders, we have responsibilities to act as role models, now more than ever before. It's a great opportunity to step up to the plate and to learn what leadership is all about. Patrick, having covered off the dimensions, have you got anything you'd like to add at this point?
Look, I think a lot of people are feeling overwhelmed at the moment. It's important to realize that, as you say, and it's important to give yourself permission to switch off at night, permission to have a good night's sleep, permission not to think about coronavirus 24/7. You too must look after yourself.
Thank you. Now, getting judgments is really important, but frankly, you're not going to. As one of our faculty said, first accept you're going to be wrong, and then don't beat yourself up. There's something about reframing your mistakes as learning opportunities. Undoubtedly, you'll be torn between two extremes, and it'll be a miracle if you get it right 100% all of the time. Recognize the impact of veering too far to either end of the spectrum, and don't be afraid of making a decision. Now, on this list, I would highlight the first and last of these bullet points as the ones to pay particularly close attention to. There is a need to create momentum and a sense of urgency, but doing that without creating a sense of panic. And as we've banged the drum all through this webinar, be relentless in your communication, but without overloading those communiques with too much information. Information overload can just be confusing. Again, simplicity and clarity are your friends. What we would suggest is that if the decision is a big one, then make sure you do take your time over it and gather as much evidence and data as you can before reaching your conclusion. We talked about optimism being a key attribute of highly effective leaders earlier, and this crisis is bound to be creating opportunities for businesses both at a macro and micro level. So once you have your plans in place to survive, think about how you can thrive. Ask yourself these sorts of questions. Can you pivot your business? What opportunities have emerged from this crisis? Can working practices be solidified in your organization when things return to normal? A really important side effect of talking about opportunities is that in doing so, people will become energized rather than allowing them to stagnate. And we know this from a neuroscientific perspective. We've already seen people take advantage of the crisis to redefine first dates, ordering each other takeaways for home delivery and then connecting over the internet as you eat them, having remote drinks. It's not quite the same as the real thing, but trying to make life as normal as possible is really important. And finally, as we've maintained from the beginning of this webinar, this too shall pass. We will emerge from this crisis, so it's important that we prepare and get ready for how the world will look when we do so. This is a great learning opportunity. Can you tell I'm an optimist? It'll have given you a chance to learn about your organization, the sector in which you're operating, your clients and customers, your business model, your ability to adapt and change, and most importantly, it will have taught you about the talent in your business and how your colleagues react and step up to the plate. So ask yourselves, what permanent changes can you make in the future which will be of benefit? Patrick, any final comments before I conclude and we move into some questions?
So David, I think that's been a fantastic overview of things for people to think about as they lead their businesses through this unprecedented situation. On next week's webinar, we'll talk about the short-term actions that people can take, the medium-term actions and the long-term actions to make sure that they bring their businesses through in the best possible shape into the new world, whenever that turns out to be and whatever that turns out to be like.
Thank you. So this is a human crisis. So we have to look at the problems through the lens of humanity first and foremost. We would really encourage you to think about the dimensions in which you lead, ensuring that you adapt and change your focus according to the needs and context of your organization. And remember, you're not alone. We are all in this together, So look for support and guidance from your communities, whether new or old, and your networks, both formal and informal.
David, Patrick, everyone for joining us today, thank you. And I hope that you found the last hour beneficial and that it's given you confidence and reassurance as you confront some of the challenges that lie ahead. If you would like to seek out further support beyond these webinars today, there are a number of ways that we can help you. Most relevant to today's theme, we've designed a bespoke crisis management coaching program. This consists of 3 60-minute coaching sessions hosted over Zoom, and they will address some of the issues that we've talked about today and will also be developing next week. We can also support you through executive team coaching and a number of other ways, some of which are listed in this poll. If you'd like to learn more, tick the options that interest you, and a member of our team will reach out to you later this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Good luck, stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you.